Alright, so today we are testing Avatar Frontiers of Pandora with the RTX 4070. Today we're pairing this GPU with a 12700K CPU that's running at stock, and that again is paired with DDR4 4000MHz CL18 memory. This is going to be my fourth time recording this video. I've got some equipment issues, so I'm recording this locally. Just so you know, you can add 3 or 4 frames per second to the results here. My recording piece is just not working with me today. Anyway, so we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K. Let's just go over the settings here quickly and let me get rid of that. Sorry, that MSI Afterburner overlay is a little bit big. Some people asked me to increase it a bit, and let me know if it's too big for you. So we'll just be testing on the Ultra preset now, and we'll keep those settings. We're at 1080p, and we don't have any upscaling enabled. So just one thing, we do have FSR 3 frame generation, but for that to work you need to enable FSR 3 here. It does not work with any of the other temporal upscalers. And then we also do have scaling mode settings here. So I'm just off just means native, and then we've got fixed and biased. Got no idea what the difference is. We'll just be testing it fixed, and that's pretty much it, right? So at 1080p on the Ultra preset with the RTX 4070, and let's see how this goes. Right, so this is just once you actually finish the tutorial mission, well, not the tutorial mission, the prologue, you get outside, you get out of this building. You can see the frame rate here is 110 frames per second, and then when we reach the forest area we are getting around 60 frames per second. Okay, so I'll just be doing a very short run here in this river. The game looks absolutely gorgeous, like it really does, even at 1080p. This is on a native 4K monitor, but it really looks great, as I said, even at 1080p. And you can understand why the performance is as low as it is, because the game also uses ray tracing. I don't think you can disable ray tracing, but you can decrease the intensity of it, etc. We'll go through a few of those settings right now, but we'll be testing mostly presets during this video, right? But you can see 1080p on the Ultra preset getting around 75 frames per second average here. Our lows aren't terrible, they are not too far from our average there, so all in all not terrible considering we've got a ray tracing enabled here as well. All right, so let's just enable a DLSS here, and I'll be doing the FSR results at the end of the video, purely because FSR does not work when you've got MSI Afterburner enabled, and I need to do a few things to make it work. So anyway, we'll just use the DLSS here, and we'll just use scaling mode fixed, and now we've got quality here. Ultra quality, I believe, is DLAA, so native as well. I could be wrong, but I've seen quality being referred to as DLAA in or ultra quality in other games. All right, so now with the DLSS set to quality, we gained around 30 frames per second, right? So just going to do the same thing here. My Navi is hungry. I don't have any energy left. I've been tasting this. As I said, this is the fourth time recording this video, so I've been running up and down the stream for quite a while. That's why it's indicating at the bottom there that I need to eat food. But you can see, even with DLSS set to quality at 1080p, the game, it just looks pretty. Like there's no other word. It's just a really good looking game. I broke our averages there, but I just wanted to show you what the game actually looks like. The colors pop. I know a lot of people refer to it as Avatar in Far Cry, or Far Cry with avatars. It's really not the case. The gameplay probably, but when it comes to visuals, there's a very clear separation between Far Cry and Avatar. This game is just it's very good looking. All right, so on the Ultra preset with DLSS set to quality, we got an average of 104 frames per second. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to drop it down to high, and then we'll do the same test. Right. So just on the high preset here, and then we'll just disable upscaling, and let's see how it goes. All right. So we gained around 25 frames per second, depending on which area you are but I'd say around 20 frames per second just by dropping it down to the high preset. It's still a very good looking game. I know that this MSI Afterburner is in your way, so let me get rid of that. And I think I'll just move around a bit once we actually get to 4K, so you can just see the splendor. It really is pretty good looking. Once again, still ray tracing is enabled. I'll share the settings now. Sorry, I forgot to show you earlier, but I don't think you can disable ray tracing. It's just it pertains to sun shadows and reflections, and you can state the quality of those, but you can't disable them from what I could see. I might be wrong. Also, I'm sick. Sorry for the nasally voice. If my voice irritates you, just mute and watch the performance and benchmarks in the top left-hand corner there. I've been sick for around 2 weeks now. It's just not getting better. It's the long cold. Alright, so an average of 91 frames per second, which is definitely not terrible considering that it is at a native. Alright, so let's go ahead and enable DLSS here. So we'll just go fixed and quality. Alright, so it seems like we gained another 20 frames per second. I mean, now you can just see that the reflection, I don't think the reflections are that great anymore. There does seem to be some artifacting in the reflections, especially in moving mortar. Some refractions not displaying properly. Anyway, I accidentally hit the deer. I think it's a deer you can punch. I thought I could hunt him to get some food, to just get rid of this indicator at the bottom left, so on the bottom middle, and that did not work. Anyway, we're yet to benchmark, and I mean, I'm not going to be talking too much about what this game looks like. Just it's really good looking, and it doesn't, like, we've seen some benchmarks previously, but that's without context. A lot of the benchmark I've seen so far, written benchmarks, don't really mention that there's ray tracing involved, etc. So I think this should give you a better idea. Anyway, so 124 frames per second average at 1080p with DLSS set to quality on the high preset. And I think it's time for us to move on to 1440p. As I said, we'll do the frame generation tests at the end of the video once we've gone through all the resolutions. Yeah. Right, we're now at 1440p. We're back on the ultra preset here, and we're at native. No scaling is enabled there. Just to show you what I mean about the ray traced settings here. So this sun context shadows you can actually disable, right? But you can see the dimensions ray tracing there. Then we do have diffuse reflections. They also mention ray tracing. This you can't turn off, and these you can also only set to very low, right? So I don't think it disables ray tracing on those settings. Anyway, a lot of testing still needs to be done. Anyway, so 1440p ultra native, and off we go. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go. Actually, I lie, seeing that this is my 4th time doing this specific video. I know exactly how this is going to go, and we're not hitting 60 frames per second. We're dipping into the 40s here. I've actually seen 1 or 2 areas where it drops into like 37, 30, 38 frames per second. But you will need to use DLSS, unfortunately, or FSR if you've got an AMD GPU to get playable frame rates, purely because, as I said, it's got ray tracing. But this just looks, I don't know, I'm awestruck. It really looks extremely good, especially at 1440p. This is still on the 4K monitor, so there's a little bit of blurriness still because the monitor is then upscaling from 1440p to 4K. So it's not really ideal, but once we get to 4K, it'll really shine. But as you can see, ultra preset, maybe give it a skip, because we are sitting at 9.8 gigabytes of VRAM used there, so definitely not ideal. But all right, that's the ultra preset for you. So let's just enable DLSS here. So let's just do this, go into scaling here and do DLSS quality. All right, spoiler alert, I tested this earlier, and we are able to maintain 60 frames per second at all times. Well, during my testing as well. Anyway, there might be some areas where there's explosions and stuff where the frame rate might dip, but in this specific area, it seems to be quite demanding, this area. Inside, you'd see that you'll get sometimes even more than double the frame rate. You see here, I saw 160, 170 frames per second inside. So definitely the words are very difficult to render, and it makes sense. All right. As I said, I'm not going to be talking too much about what the game looks like, but I'm amazed. Anyway, 70 frames per second, definitely not terrible. So if you do want to play on the ultra preset, you can just use DLSS set to quality, and you can see that our VRAM usage is still within limits. We're nearing that 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer, 9.6 gigabytes used currently. But all in all, if you're aiming for 60 frames per second, this is definitely not a terrible experience. All right, but now we're back at 1440p native, just on the high preset. Everything else is still the same. And let's see what happens here. And now we are getting pretty much 60 frames per second. Actually, even when not recording, remember I'm recording locally via GeForce Experience, so we lose around 3 frames per second, right? It doesn't matter if I'm getting 200 frames per second or if I am getting 10 frames per second. I lose 3 frames per second when I record. So with that in mind, we should be able to hit 60 frames per second pretty much almost all of the time, right? If we're not recording, as we are getting around 58 frames per second. As I said, I think my capture card is just done for. I've had a few issues with it recently, and I just think it's time for it to be replaced. Anyway, so I mean, this will probably give you locked 60 frames per second. Maybe change 1 or 2 settings, as I said, depending on what exactly is happening on the screen. It might dip below because we're on the edge there of 60 frames per second with an average of 61. All right, so let's just see what DLSS can do here for us. We'll just use the DLSS quality once again on the high preset. I think that's pretty doable. I actually tested this earlier on the medium preset, and medium preset with DLSS set to quality seems to be a sweet spot for me for a high refresh rate experience, because I've got a 165 hertz 1440p panel that I use daily, and if I can get close to that, I mean, I'll definitely try. And I think I got around 120 frames per second on the medium preset with DLSS set to quality. Anyway, we'll have to check. But now you can see we're getting around 90 frames per second, still pretty respectable, pretty good. But depending on what you consider a high refresh rate experience, this is not it. I'd say 120 frames per second plus would be considered high refresh rate. But I mean, that's up to interpretation. I know a lot of people, 90 frames per second plus would be high refresh rate, and I mean, I'm not there to argue at all. So 90 frames per second, it is 93 average actually, and our lows are pretty respectable as well. All right, so let's move it down to medium and see what happens. All right, so this is on the medium preset. That big frame time spike was just me getting out of the window, and the medium without DLSS, and now we are able to maintain 60 frames per second, right? So what I've seen with my previous testing, as I said, I've tested this game multiple times because I've recorded it multiple times. We gain around 10% in performance with each setting that we drop down, like each preset, I mean. So going from ultra to high, we gained around 10%, and so forth and so forth. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly what more I can tell you here, except talking about how good looking this game is. You can definitely see the performance numbers for yourself there. All in all, I think 1440p with the RTX 4070 is pretty good, especially seeing that you can use something like DLSS balanced even to get a pretty high performance bump here. So while we're at it, let's just do DLSS quality. I'm not going to be testing way too many settings. The video will be just way too long, and people get bored. So let's just enable scaling here. We'll do DLSS quality again, but once again, 1440p on the medium preset, right? So, and now we're getting just above 100 frames per second. So it's around 10% performance boost, maybe slightly more because there we got 110. So around 10 to 20 frames per second performance increase just by just enabling DLSS here, right? Some areas it's slightly higher. I saw it go up to 110, 112 there for a second. So, I mean, still the performance gains are pretty good, and DLSS quality is still definitely good looking and at 1440p. Not a lot of artifacting unless you are pixel peeping. One thing that I did notice though is that FSR, when you enable that, it does become slightly more blurry. But I mean, the results when it comes to FSR versus DLSS, it's just slightly different in some games. DLSS definitely looks slightly better, and it does seem to be the case in this game as well when we start enabling FSR and then frame generation, but we'll get to that right now. All right, so that concludes our 1440p testing. Let's move on to 4K. All right, we're now at 4K. We don't have any upscaling enabled yet. We're on the medium preset for a reason. You'll see now this game is pretty intensive at 4K, and the RTX 4070 is not a 4K GPU, depending on whether you want to get 30 frames per second or not. Anyway, so 4K getting around 30 frames per second. Just I'm not sure if this is going to come through in the YouTube video compression and all that kind of stuff, but these trees just look lifelike the way they move in 4K, especially. Like, it's just so crisp and clear, and I don't know, it looks pretty good. That's the last thing I'll be talking about when it comes to the visuals of the game. Let me reset the numbers because I broke it there by looking up. If you do want a higher frame rate, just look up, and by the way. But all in all, if you're looking for a 30 frames per second experience, this will give it to you at native. I do know a few people that play at 30 frames per second. No problem with that at all. I personally just prefer to play at 60 frames per second. And I mean, the input latency still feels fine at 30 in this game. I mean, we don't have any frame generation enabled here, so the responsiveness seems to be okay. But we are once again encroaching on that 12 gigabyte VRAM buffer there. We've got 11.5 gigabytes allocated and then around 10 gigabytes used. So not a lot of headroom left when it comes to the 12 gigabyte VRAM that this GPU has. All right, so I'm just going to enable DLSS here, but we'll just enable it on balanced. The reason for that is on quality, in my previous testing, I'm not able to hit 60 frames per second. So we'll just use balanced. Just so you know, we got around 55 frames per second with DLSS set to quality, so it's not far off of 60. We did get a nice performance bump from 30 to 55 frames per second, but DLSS balanced seems to be the sweet spot for 4K 60, right? I mean, it's not true 4K because it's rendering internally at a lower resolution, but the final image or the output image is a 4K, so it still looks plenty good on a 4K monitor. Pretty crisp, not a lot of artifacting except maybe some shadows that seem to misbehave. Some reflections just don't seem to be as crisp. But all in all, if I had to daily have 4K monitor, this is probably where I would have played this game. I mean, I do have a 4K monitor. I just prefer the high refresh rate of the 1440p monitor, so I play there. And if I want to get a 4K high refresh rate monitor, then I'll need a 1490. Anyway, nobody's got money for that. Anyway, that's it for our normal DLSS and 4K testing. We'll be testing FSR just now. I'm just going to see if I can actually get it to work this time. I can get FSR 3 to work, but then MSI Afterburner doesn't work. And sometimes I have to restart the PC for that to work, and then it's just a mission. So if I do get it working, you'll see that right now. Otherwise, this will be the end of this video. Alright, I seem to have got it working. Anyway, so this is exactly the same settings as previously, except for DLSS balance. We are now using FSR 3 balanced, and then I've got frame generation enabled. And with frame generation, we gained, I don't know how much was it, like 15 frames per second, 15 to 20 frames per second, which is pretty good considering at 4K. Usually with DLSS 3 frame generation, I don't gain much on the 4060 and 4070 GPUs, just because it's running out of resources at 4K, right? But seeing that FSR 3 actually works a little bit different, I do think that we are gaining slightly more than what we would have if we had to use DLSS 3 frame generation at 4K with the RTX 4070. Anyway, still a lot of stuttering actually now with FSR 3. I've noticed it in my previous recordings as well, which you can't see, but the frame time graph is pretty inconsistent now, and the 0.1% lows are pretty low in comparison now. All right, but I'll just drop this down to 1440p, and then we'll drop it down to 1080p as well. All right, we're now at 1440p. We're on the high preset here, and what I've done now is I've enabled FSR 3 quality and then frame generation, so the results should be similar to DLSS set to quality, what we had previously, right? And then just with frame generation enabled, let me just reset our numbers here. You can see if I reset the numbers, like the lows don't really work that well here. Now, FSR 3 does have some specific requirements when it comes to VRR and VSync and all that kind of nonsense, and then AFMF has its own separate requirements which contradict FSR 3 completely. So it is a little bit of a mess at the moment. The two frame generation technologies from AMD requiring completely different settings to work. I don't have VSync enabled here. I don't have VRR enabled here. So the frame time graph might be slightly inconsistent due to not matching the exact requirements of FSR 3. But if I do enable VSync, I'll be capturing at 60 frames per second. I'll be locked at 60 frames per second. So, I mean, that's not ideal. This is just to see the performance. So, I mean, as I said earlier, this is probably where I'll be playing this game on my 1440p 165 Hz monitor, as we've got an average of around 140 frames per second here, which is actually pretty good, and the game is still pretty good looking. Alright, now we'll just test frame generation at 1080p, and then we're done. Right, we're now at 1080p. I've got FSR 3 set to quality once again, and now we're on the ultra preset. Now, as I said, I'm not entirely sure if I actually mentioned in this recording or one of the previous three. A lot of people ask me why I don't test frame generation at native. It's because frame generation adds input latency, and if you do use DLSS or FSR at least quality, it does negate some of that input latency penalty. So that's why I'd always use at least DLSS or FSR 3 quality when testing frame generation technologies. Now you can see at 1080p on the ultra preset, not on the high preset anymore, we are getting pretty much the same as what we had at 1440p on the high preset with frame generation enabled, right? Maybe 4 or 5 frames per second more, but we are probably running into CPU bottleneck here, and that's another difference between DLSS 3 frame generation and FSR 3 frame generation. It does seem like DLSS frame generation does help a bit more when you are CPU bound. You can see our GPU usage there is dipping into the mid 90s or mid 80s there at times. So definitely CPU bound at this resolution with these settings. But if you want an extremely high refresh rate experience for a single player game anyway, then these settings would do. All right, hopefully all of my stuff recorded well this time. I'm holding thumbs. I'm not looking forward to recording this video again, but if it did, then this is the end of the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and as always, we hope to see you in the next one.